Let's get one thing straight. Medieval castles were cold. Not grab a sweater cold, but see your breath hanging in the air cold. These were stone fortresses built to survive sieges, not to comfort guests. There was no central heating, no radiators, and certainly no warm duvets with goose feathers and thermal sheets. So how did they do it? How did people in these drafty, freezing fortresses manage to sleep through the night without turning into human icicles? Today, we're stepping into the shadows, into the frost of the past, to find out how medieval people didn't just endure the cold. They made it through the night barely. When we picture medieval castles, we often imagine warm candlelight dancing on tapestries, banquets in grand halls, and nobles lounging in fur-lined robes. But the truth is, most castles were brutally uncomfortable at night, especially in winter. Behind those thick stone walls was a world colder than many winter forests. No insulation, no double glazing, just raw stone, open corridors, and wind that whistled through every crack like a warning. Sleeping in a castle wasn't romantic. It was a nightly struggle, and surviving the cold was as important as surviving your enemies. Let's start with the fundamental problem. Stone. Castles were made of it for good reason. Stone is fireproof, durable, excellent against arrows and battering rams. But it's also a terrible insulator. Unlike wood or mud brick, stone absorbs cold like a sponge. And once cold, it stays that way for hours, sometimes days. Even if you lit a fire in a room, the heat would vanish the moment the flames died. Now imagine this. Thick stone walls, sometimes 10 feet deep, surrounding you on all sides. A vaulted ceiling rising overhead. Tiny windows, if any. No carpets, no insulation. Just slabs of rock echoing your footsteps and radiating the chill of the earth. And the layout didn't help. Great halls were massive open spaces. Bedchambers were often perched in towers high above the ground where drafts blew strongest. Spiral staircases acted like wind tunnels. And the only things stopping a midnight breeze were heavy wooden doors and tapestries, if you could afford them. In short, castles were built to keep enemies out, not to keep warmth in. And it wasn't just the stone. The design itself contributed to the cold. Most rooms weren't sealed shut. They were part of a network of chambers and hallways that allowed drafts to creep in from every direction. Open courtyards let the wind into the very heart of the castle. So at night, when the sun set and the fires dimmed, the cold became a silent invader. Unseen, unstoppable, and absolutely everywhere. In most medieval castles, the closest thing to heating was an open hearth. Just a large stone fireplace if you were lucky. If not, just a small fire pit in the center of the room. These fireplaces were inefficient. They filled the air with smoke. They struggled to warm even the immediate space, let alone a complete chamber with 20-foot ceilings. Worse yet, there were no chimneys before the 12th century. Smoke just drifted upward, hoping to escape through holes in the roof or ceiling. Most of it didn't. So what did they do? They relied on bedroom fires called alcove hearths. But only the wealthy had them. Servants and lower members of the household often slept in cold, unheated side rooms or even hallways without any fire at all. For those with means, they used braziers, metal bowls filled with hot coals. These could warm a room slightly, but they came with danger. Hot embers in a wooden room. You see the problem. Fires were common. So were burns. And then there was the smoke. More than one person in medieval history died not from freezing, but from carbon monoxide poisoning in a poorly ventilated room. Still, the brazier glowed, the fire crackled, and for a brief moment, warmth returned enough to remove your boots and hope for morning. Now we get to the true medieval survival weapon, the curtain bed. These weren't just decorated aristocratic furniture. The four-poster bed with heavy drapes existed for one reason: to keep warmth in. Imagine a tent inside a stone room wrapped in layers of thick fabric. That's what these beds were. The curtains weren't decorative. They were functional. At night, you pulled them shut, sealing yourself off from the rest of the freezing room. The warmth of your body, and maybe one or two others, was trapped inside this cocoon of cloth. But it gets better. Wealthier families lined the curtains with wool or fur. Some even used felted woolen blankets thick as rugs as added insulation. The bed itself was raised, sometimes several feet off the cold floor, to avoid drafts that slithered along the stone. And the mattress was a sack filled with straw or feathers. Not exactly memory foam, but it held warmth. And most importantly, it stayed dry. Families often huddled together. 2, 3, even 4 bodies in one bed. Children slept with siblings. Servants slept with other servants. Warmth was more important than personal space. You didn't sleep spread out. You curled up tight, knees tucked in, arms wrapped around your chest. It wasn't comfort. It was containment. And once you were in, you didn't get out until daylight. Let's be clear. Surviving a castle night wasn't something you did alone. Especially not if you were nobility. Enter the servants. Specifically, the night servants. These men and women had one goal: make sure their master didn't freeze. And they did this in ways both clever and exhausting. First, they prepared the bedchamber. Hours before bedtime, a servant would light a fire using embers and set up the brazier. They'd warm bedstones, flat rocks heated by fire, and slide them into the mattress to preheat it. They'd boil water and pour it into metal bottles or ceramic jars, which were wrapped in cloth and placed beneath the blankets like medieval hot water bottles. Next came the blankets. Thick wool, sometimes fur, always layered. Servants would smooth the mattress, arrange the linen sheets if any, and fold extra coverings at the feet. And then they stayed in the room all night, listening, waiting, sometimes sleeping propped in a chair near the door. Why? To tend the brazier, to add logs to the fire, to bring warm water if needed, to fetch another blanket if their master stirred. Their job didn't end when their master fell asleep. In many ways, that's when it began. Even nobles weren't immune to cold, chronic coughs, stiffened joints, winter fevers. The best remedy wasn't a doctor. It was a competent servant with a supply of warm rocks and a pot of heated wine. Some noble women even had warming stools, wooden frames lined with pans filled with embers. They sat on these during evening prayers or reading. Others wrapped their legs in sheepskin or fur-lined boots that never left their bedside. In short, the comfort of one person was often built on the labor of 3 or 4 others. You might think that nobles had it better when it came to sleeping warm, and in some ways they did. Larger beds, thicker blankets, personal fires. But here's the twist. Castle design often made their chambers colder. Noble bedchambers were placed on the upper floors of towers, farther from the earth's natural warmth, more exposed to wind, and often built with large windows to display wealth. These windows, of course, had no glass. At best, they had wooden shutters or thin oiled cloth. So while lords and ladies had help, fires lit, beds warmed, servants watching, the cold still reached them, sometimes worse than the poor sleeping below. Servants, squires, kitchen boys. They often slept near the kitchen hearth, in cellars, or in cramped quarters where the stone retained a bit of daytime warmth. Some even curled up beside livestock in castle stables because body heat, whether from a cow or a cousin, was better than none. The warmth-to-wealth ratio wasn't linear. In castles, warmth came from location, not luxury. And in that irony lies the truth. Cold didn't respect rank. It seeped through stone, slipped beneath doors, and chilled everyone equally, unless you were fortunate enough to sleep above a bakery. Now let's talk about the true survivors. The people who didn't even get to lie down. The night guards, the watchmen, the men posted along the ramparts, the gatehouses, the towers. These weren't soldiers in gleaming armor. They were often young, poorly fed, and wrapped in layers of damp wool. Their job was simple. Don't fall asleep. Don't freeze. Don't die. They walked the walls, stood watch for hours, sat on stone benches with the wind slicing across the battlements. There were no braziers, no beds, just the occasional torch, and even that was rare. So how did they survive? They moved constantly. They stamped their feet, swung their arms, huddled beside each other like birds on a branch. Some chewed dried cloves or bitter herbs to stay awake. Others muttered prayers with every breath, hoping the sun would rise faster. Sometimes they rotated every 2 hours. Sometimes they didn't. A few castles kept firepots near watch stations, metal bowls with coals, but carrying one up the spiral stairs was dangerous and cumbersome. Many guards held hot stones wrapped in cloth and tucked them beneath their cloaks. Others carried flasks of spiced wine or ale, not to get drunk, but to keep the blood moving. Alcohol didn't warm them, but it made them forget how cold they were. And if they failed, if they nodded off, if they abandoned their post, punishment could be swift. For them, the cold wasn't just discomfort. It was a test, one you couldn't afford to fail, because if you fell asleep and an enemy entered, everyone paid the price. So how did people sleep in medieval castles without freezing to death? The answer is barely. They didn't sleep in comfort. They slept in layers, in groups, in silence, in fear of cold drafts that came drifting down tower staircases like ghosts. They built fires that smoked, carried rocks that burned, and pulled curtains that barely blocked the chill. They relied on servants to bring heat, on animals to share warmth, and on each other to endure. And still some didn't make it. Winter deaths were common. Fevers turned fatal. Illness meant exposure. And exposure in a medieval castle was often a death sentence. But they endured because that's what people do. They adapt. They wrap themselves in whatever they can find. Wool, ash, ritual, tradition. And they pass those survival lessons down generation to generation, one cold night at a time. So the next time you pull a blanket over your shoulders or turn up the thermostat, remember that in the past, someone was trying to sleep on stone with smoke in their lungs and frost on their breath. And they made it. Not because they were warm, but because they were determined. And sometimes that's enough.